Welcome. Thanks again for coming. We really appreciate you taking the time. We know that everybody has a lot of calls, so it means a lot to us that you would spend time with us talking about B Corp. So you can put in the chat anything you feel comfortable sharing, name, company, LinkedIn, what you're hoping to learn today, and we will have time for questions and answers at the end. So let's get started. If you could also mute yourself, that would be amazing. Okay, so today we're just gonna do some intros. Naman and I will introduce ourselves. We're gonna give an overview of B Corp, why companies get certified, what the application process looks like, some tips and tricks for applying, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and discussions. So the first thing that we need to say is neither Naman and I are affiliated with B Lab or B Corp. We just have experience helping companies do the applications, so we want to share that with other companies. So Naman, you want to go first?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Naman. I stay in Toronto. I am building a small media company. It's called Epic, and it revolves around sustainability. So I basically create video podcasts with founders that are building businesses to improve the health of the planet. I also write a weekly newsletter covering stories of startups across the world that are making the planet a better place to live. And I help Eliza with hosting these events and learning more about B Corp.
Awesome. And I'm Eliza Erskine. I'm based in New York City. I am the founder of Green Buoy Consulting, and Green Buoy provides sustainability strategy, consulting, reporting, and B Corp certification services to early stage, small and mid-sized companies. So let's go into B Corp. So B Corp certification certifies your company to a specific social and environmental standard. It's delivered by a body called B Lab. And B Lab is a nonprofit organization that takes you through the whole process, and they're the ones that are in charge of certifying. So B Corp certification means that you've passed B Lab's criteria and are approved as a company that incorporates people, planet, and profit into your business structure. So B Corp companies have to fill out an online assessment. They change their legal standing to a benefit corporation, and then you have to pay a fee in order to get certified. So I think a good way to help explain the certification is to look at companies that are certified. So we see Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, Lemonade, Allbirds, Clean Canteen. Certification is open to any type of for-profit business as long as you are for profit, but you can be product or service based. So the certification, when you think of, okay, what is a social and environmental standard? The certification looks at the strength of your business in the 5 main areas that are listed: workers, environment, community, customers, and governance. So it's a holistic look at your business in those 5 areas. Those are the 5 areas that the assessment goes through, and that's what your business gets rated on. So why get certified? This is, as companies, start to look at B Corp and see B Corp, why do companies take all this time and effort? And often it's a monetary investment for companies to become certified. So companies, I think, in talking to companies and just seeing companies that go through the certification, they really look at B Corp as a certification of their values and the actions that they're taking to support the planet, especially for companies that are growing and don't have a specific sustainability team. Maybe they're taking action on sustainability. The certification process is a great way to kind of cement those practices and prove that you're taking action. There are a ton of statistics and more on how B Corps grow faster. They have better customer retention. They performed better during the pandemic. All these statistics kind of prove that B Corp is a worthy certification in that way. So I think that these quotes on the slide are just examples of companies talking about why they get certified. So Tiffany, you can read the quotes, but Tiffany at TMI Consulting is talking about how it's been great for their employee engagement. They don't have to find staff. They don't have to find employees. Employees seek them out. And then Tom at this life insurance company, he's talking about how people want to do businesses with other B Corps. I've had this conversation with a lot of service-based businesses, different consultancies that are, they're management consultants, but they want to be working only with B Corps. So a way for them to get work with B Corps is by becoming a B Corp themselves. So B Corps talk a lot about employee engagement, hiring, showing the B Corp certification to connect with customers and suppliers. I mean, I think each of us can think about different brands like Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, from a consumer perspective. We look at these and say, oh, wow, they're a B Corp. And that has meaning to us. And that I think can help us sway in decision-making as customers. So these are companies, Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, they have a significant following, but they've also made these explicit environmental commitments, and B Corp really kind of solidifies that. Okay, so let's talk about the certification process. We are going to have time for questions at the end, and I'll ask questions or time for questions as we're going through. So let's talk about what it takes to get certified and what that process looks like. So to get certified as a company, you have to complete what's called the B Impact Assessment. Some people call it the BIA. It's about 100 different questions in those 5 areas that I talked about earlier. So it will look at workers, environment, governance, community, and customers. And then each of those questions are scored, and you have to have a score of 80 or higher in order to get certified. So each question is weighed differently, and each question you have to provide proof and documentation for each answer. So you can see on the right, diverse ownership and leadership, measurement of diversity. These are examples of questions that they'll ask. And then you're scored differently based on your rating to that. So for example, female management is a question about the percentage of your management that is made up of females. And the higher that is, the higher your score will be. So when you've completed the assessment, you've gone through, and as you're going through it, will show you how many points you're at, how much each one is worth. Once you have enough points, you apply. B-Lab reviews it, and then you meet with them to go over the application, make sure you're at 80, and then you go back and forth with them, and then the legal requirement is next, and then you're approved. So I'll go over each of these in detail the next few slides. So let's talk about completing the assessment, and if you have any questions about this, put them in the chat, and we can go through it right now. So this completing the assessment is what I get kind of the most questions on. This is really the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about today. So the assessment is, it's about 100 questions. It does depend on your industry type and business type. So if you're a service-based business or not, what industry you're in, and then it does go over those 5 areas. Every business, no matter the type or industry, will have questions in those 5 areas. It's an online platform. It's free to use. I recommend you can go on and look at it. And you go through each question and answer, and then provide backup data. So points are weighed differently based on your industry and the type of business that you have, and also how you answer other questions could lead to additional questions or not. So you do get more points for higher scoring answers. So like I said before with the female management example, the higher percentage of your management that's female, the higher your score will be. And then as you're going through the assessment, it's really, really important that you are documenting an answer. So when they're asking about total energy use, renewable energy usage, these are examples of environmental questions. You need to be showing any bills that you have that prove environmental or energy use, excuse me. Anything that shows about facility energy efficiency, anything that you're answering, you have to be able to say, here's proof that we're doing this. And when you're in the assessment, each thing will have a place for comments and uploads. You can also use those comments to talk about what you're doing or any policies and things that you have in place. But it's really, really important that as you're going through it, you're documenting it, both for your own just kind of organization and making sure that you're checking, but also because B Lab will review that documentation, and that will depend on how they score you. So the next thing I want to go through is the verification process. So this is the process. Once you have applied, you send it in to B Lab for verification. So the first part is you completing the assessment on your own. Then you send it into B Lab and you begin what's called the verification process. So the first thing to note for this process is that you need a minimum of 80 points to be certified. I recommend, if you're doing the assessment, that you apply at 85 points or above. So because you're going through with B Lab and as you're meeting with them, they're going through the documentation most of the time. And I think B Lab has said that companies on average drop between 5 and 10 points. So the more points that you can get will give you that kind of buffer between staying above 80. So in working with clients or other companies, there is, obviously when you finish the assessment, you're really excited, you're really close, it's the next step. But if you're at 80 points and you're thinking of applying, I recommend waiting. So just, if you can get a couple more weeks and get a couple more points, it's definitely worth it to wait. Because if you're under 80 points, then you're going to go back to the end of the queue during the process. So I recommended applying above 80. And then once B Lab gets your assessment, it goes into their internal system and they will do a background check. They'll send you some follow-up questions. They'll ask you about different business activities. You'll have to disclose information on employees, suppliers, and they'll start going through your assessment and noting things and adding things for you to talk about in your assessment review call. So that's kind of the final part of the verification process, is you meet with B Lab, you meet with a B Lab employee and you go through your assessment with them. So this is where that documentation comes in handy. They'll have picked out things in their internal review. Oh, tell us about this benefits policy, or tell us about this environmental policy that you disclosed. They're very friendly. They really, they want to help you. They're there to help you get certified, but they are very much a stickler for documentation and a stickler for answers. So you need to go in with the assumption that they will be reviewing any point value that's high. Different things are worth different point values. But if it's a policy that you've said that you have, you need to make sure that you're showing that policy and attaching that policy. So the verification process right now, B Lab is running at, I think it's about a 2 to 3 month queue after you apply. They've had so much interest and so many companies that are applying for this certification that, there's a line basically. So it also does really benefit you to make sure that your assessment's complete, it's correct, and you're ready, so that when you do get in that line and get into the verification process, you can move along quickly. So the last part of this I just want to touch on are the legal and fee implications. So for B Corp, I've heard some mixed messaging just from talking to people around the legal portion of this. So to become a B Corp, you have to make a legal change of changing your legal structure, whether it's a corporation, whether it's an LLC, to become a benefit corporation. The legal part is non-negotiable. It's required for every company. it's part of what ensures you to a standard of this idea of triple bottom line, because a benefit corporation legally is saying we are legally holding ourselves to this standard of considering people, planet, and profit in our business operations. So the legal change is really a crucial part of saying that you're holding yourself to this B Corp standard. The legal technicalities do vary by state. I am not a lawyer. So you can check online. B Lab's website also has pretty robust information about the different legal things. If you do have a legal question, DM me, send me an email, put it in the chat. I have a couple of lawyers that I'm connected with that do this specifically, so I can put you in touch with them. And then the other kind of administrative part of becoming a B Corp is you do have to pay a fee to become a B Corp. So the fees are based on your revenue, and the higher your annual revenue is, the higher the fee is. So I think someone asked earlier, at what point should we be thinking about B Corp certification? A lot of companies do take revenue into account, because the earlier you are in your business, normally your revenue is lower, and therefore your fee to get certified is going to be lower. The B Corp will take an annual fee from you, so that will increase as your revenue increases, but it's just another consideration for the when should we apply, if you're thinking about what your revenue is. And again, if you go to B Corp's website, I'll share this later in the presentation. They have a list of what the fees are, how it works, and what the fees are by revenue. Okay, so these, now I'm gonna go through some common questions that I get just about the assessment, about the process, and hopefully this will help you as you're thinking through these things. So the first question that I get a lot is, how long will it take? So this is, I would say, far and away the most common question. Unfortunately, the answer is it really varies. It varies just based on a variety of things. I can help you kind of think about how to think through this. So when you're thinking about how long it will take, there's two main factors that you should consider, which the first is how much do you have documented already? When you go through the assessment and you're looking through, are you saying, oh yeah, we have that. Oh yeah, I have this. Yeah, we're doing this. We're doing this. We're doing this. And it's just uploading documentation. If you're in that position, obviously it will take you less time than somebody that has to maybe create some of those policies from scratch or needs to make some internal changes before they can become certified. So that's the first kind of thing to keep in mind, is how much you have documented. The second is what resources do you have to allocate to this process? Do you have, for instance, an intern that you can have complete this and go through all the documentation and go through the assessment? Or are you in a place where you're already working 60 hours a week and this is something that you want to add? So it does take a lot of time to do it, and it's important to consider those kind of different resources. There is no average because it depends on the company, but this is not something that can be done in an afternoon. This is something that takes most companies, I would say, at least 3 months, and usually 6 to 9. So it's something that is time consuming. If you're trying to figure out, okay, how long is this going to take? I recommend companies allocate a certain number of hours a week. I've talked to founders that say they block off, every Friday afternoon for an hour. And if you spend, an hour every Friday afternoon for a quarter, you're going to get pretty close. So it's really just kind of figuring out the timing that works for you. So the second question that I get a lot is, I don't do fill in the blank, whether that's environmental things, or maybe you're looking at some of the supply chain things. Is that okay? That is fine for the most part. I recommend that companies really lean into the areas that you do have. You will need to show some things depending on your industry. If you are in a business where you do a lot of manufacturing and you have a lot of suppliers, then you will need to be talking about your supply chain and how you're interacting with suppliers. But B Corp definitely frames the assessment based on your industry. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, we're a service-based company, we don't have a lot of environmental things that we're doing, they're not going to ask you a lot of environmental questions because that's not material to your business. Whereas a service-based company is going to get a lot of questions about employee engagement, maybe different diversity questions, a lot of customer questions, who you're interacting with in that way. So I recommend that companies, lean into things they're already doing and steps they're already taking and trying to focus on that for the assessment. So the other question I get is how much does it cost? We talked about that a little bit earlier, but pricing is based on revenue. I think it's still about $1,000 annually if your revenue is under 150,000, and then it goes up in pricing from there. The other thing I want to note about how long will it take? That question can be, okay, how long will the assessment take? And then how long will it take for me to get fully certified? Earlier we talked about the verification process with B Lab. That verification process can take, once you're in it and you're starting that process with them, that can take anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. And it can take up to 3 months to even begin the verification process. So if you're thinking, okay, it's going to take probably 3 to 4 months to finish the assessment, then we might have to wait a couple months to get in the verification queue. Then we're going to be verifying with B Lab for 2 to 3 months. That sort of process length of time can definitely take a long time. So if you're in a mindset of, okay, we want to be certified by the end of 2021, it's important to keep those kind of timelines in mind. So if I haven't seen any questions specifically about the assessment, if anybody wants to put one in the chat, I can go over it. We'll also have time for questions at the end. So this next slide, Sylvina asks, which areas give you more points? It really kind of varies depending on industry, but the questions that are worth the most points are the ones that are around policies and kind of larger company structure. So for example, one of the questions that's worth a lot of points is for your board and executive team, do you have a board resolution that's adopting the triple bottom line ethos, and you're saying that you're going to be making these changes, like supply chain code of conduct, different employee handbook and employee items that are more documentation heavy, those are worth more, where other things like, renewable energy, that might not be worth as much. If you go on the assessment and you can download an Excel format and a PDF. If you download the Excel format, you can then sort by points and it will show you the point value of each. So that's just a way to kind of look at. Lily says, we're a nonprofit social enterprise. Is this inapplicable to us? Lily, you have to be a for-profit company to be included because you have to legally become a benefit corporation, and that designation is for-profit only. So I'm not sure when you say nonprofit / social enterprise. Okay, good. But yeah, you do have to be for-profit. Laura says, can a startup apply? Yes. So for a startup, there is a specific designation called a pending B Corp. So if you have been in business for less than a year, you can apply and get certified as a pending B Corp, which just means you've been in business less than a year. And then after a year in business, it transfers into a full B Corp. The pending B Corp is the way that they kind of get around the pre-revenue. So if you're pre-revenue and under a year, it's the pending B Corp. But yeah, as long as you have a business set up, I recommend that you start the application process and then can apply. Okay, those are great questions. Thank you. So let's talk about other things to kind of keep in mind. I call sort of B Corp in this assessment, it's unique in that it's transparent and also private. So by that, I mean, unless you tell someone, okay, if I went and told all of you, guys, I've started the B Corp assessment, you would all know, and it wouldn't be private anymore. But it's transparent in that once I start the assessment, I can see all of the questions. I can see what all of the questions are worth, and all of the points based on my answers. So I think some other assessments or other things, you're kind of filling out this document and you're just like, what does this mean? Where am I? How much more is left? When you're in the assessment, it's very obvious what point value you're at, what questions you've already answered, and what questions you still need to answer. Okay, I saw another question. Kara says, what is the difference between a benefit corporation and B Corp? So any company can become a benefit corporation. The benefit corporation is only the legal designation. So if you went to a lawyer and said, I want to become a benefit corporation, they would make the change, you would become a benefit corporation. To become a B Corp, you have to go through this whole process that I'm talking about and get certified through B Lab. So I've seen companies that have just done only the legal change and they just say on their website or whatever, they're a benefit corporation. But it is that distinction that B Corp is, you've also passed this assessment and you're on their kind of standard certification. So I guess this, I don't know if this is more confusing, but if you are a B Corp, you are a benefit corporation. But you can be a benefit corporation without being a B Corp. So, okay, what's the next part? Okay, so the next sort of tip and trick, B Lab wants to be helpful. Their mission is to get as many companies certified to B Corp as possible. They want to be of service. You know, there's consultants like me that their only job is to get people B Corp certified. So when you sign up for the assessment and start the assessment, you'll get emails from them. They offer office hours. There's a ton of email support, FAQs, resources, policies on their website. Use them. They're there to help you, and a lot of people don't really know that or use it. So don't be afraid to ask them for help, to email them. They have different ways to communicate with them and get help on your assessment. Yes, I will talk about the auditing at the end of this slide. Okay, so that was a question about the auditing process. And then the next thing that's important to keep in mind, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but use your structure in your company. So use your company culture. If your employee benefits and your employee engagement are off the charts, use that and see what other employee engagement type questions you can answer and get points from. If your company culture is to have everybody kind of pitch in and help, if you're a small team, you can add multiple people to the assessment. You can use it as a goal setting tool. Lean into the way that you already make changes and operate and do those things and use that to set up the assessment. So the other thing I want to mention, the last kind of tip, is that time is on your side. So there's no time requirement once you start the assessment. Obviously, this is good and bad because once you start, you can take years to do it. But anyone can start the assessment. So I recommend that you do start it because you really don't have a lot to lose. Okay, G says, it is understood that each certified company must be audited. Can you talk about how B Corp audits, costs, how best to pass, etc.? So I think you're talking about, G, and correct me if I'm wrong, B Corp, in part of the assessment process, especially if you're a really big company, they will choose to audit companies randomly once you're certified and as part of the process. So that's included in your assessment fee and the fee that you pay. It's just part of their internal audit system. The other kind of part of the audit is that you have to recertify every 3 years. So you do have to keep up that standard and, you know, keep your assessment up. You go through the verification again and they check you in that way. I am pretty sure that B Corp will also do a random audit. I'm not quite sure of that, but they definitely have ways of talking about and checking on companies that they're doing. Thanks, Kara. If you, so that's the way that B Corp audits. The other audit that I think you might be talking about is to go through the process, and I think, if you can hire someone like me or someone else to kind of help you through the assessment and get you through that verification process. If that's not clear, just put in the chat and we can talk about that. Jill says, can you clarify being a public benefit corp, but not a certified B Corp? Yes. So any company can become a public benefit corporation because that is just the legal designation. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but you can go and make those changes. To me, the change that you have to make, it's a lot of kind of administrative legal paperwork, but it basically says we are going to hold ourselves to this legal standard of considering the environment and other employees alongside profitability. So if you're just a public benefit corporation, you are not a B Corp unless you have gone through this whole process and become certified by B Lab. And then the final step of becoming certified is changing your designation to a benefit corporation. But if you just want to become a public benefit corporation and talk about that with your stakeholders in a way that's comfortable for you, you can just make that legal change. Olivia says, can you share a bit more about the pending B Corp process? Yes, you still have to do the assessment. It's the same exact process. It's just how they designate that you're under a year in business. And then within a year, you have to go back, and that status only is for that amount of time. And then you have to go and say, okay, we've been a year in, and you have to verify that you're making money. Are there negatives to becoming a pending B Corp? I think, and this again is kind of what we were talking about earlier, when is the best time to become certified? It really depends on the company and what you have time, interest, and focus for. I find it helpful if you're a small company and you're thinking, okay, we want to become a B Corp. We need to be making employee handbooks. We need to be in this mindset of hiring people. How are we going to hire people? Are we going to say these are the different diversity goals that we're going for? We want to create environmental policies. I think it's great for a small company to do those things when you're a smaller company, because you're just developing those policies and different things to align with B Corp, and then you can become B Corp certified as part of that process. Whereas companies that wait and set up in other ways and are just like, okay, here's whatever employee handbook, here's whatever policies, then they have to go back, say in 5 years, and change them anyway. So if you're in this B Corp mindset, it's, I think, beneficial to do it earlier when you're kind of developing those things that B Corp is going to ask you about. So the argument I've seen for companies waiting is that they just don't have the time. They have, a lot of other things on their plates. Some, the way companies operate, or they just want to have all those things in place and then kind of go back and do B Corp. But it totally depends on the company and how they want to do things. So I'm going to put these in the chat and then I'll get to the rest of the questions at the end. So here are the resources. This is the legal requirements and then the certification from B Corp's website. So those will help kind of explain more about those things. Okay, let's I'll talk about Sophia's questions. Where do you see people lose the most points when the application is processed? It totally depends on the company. I think the biggest thing that I see is that companies think they don't have to show documentation, or they don't have the right documentation. So if you just say, yep, here's our supplier, we talk to suppliers, we communicate with them, and that's worth 5 points, and you don't have a supplier code of conduct to back it up, or examples of communicating with suppliers, you're not going to get those points. So I think the biggest thing to avoid losing points is to make sure that you have those things fully documented. Are there types of documentation that commonly cause more point loss than others? No, I haven't seen that. I think, again, it's just the biggest hurdle for a lot of companies is getting that documentation, so they avoid it or put it off. So that's why I recommend that you have everything documented. If you say that you have done a point, whatever it is, and you can show proof, then that point is there. B Lab gets a little nitpicky with some of the things, but I think the biggest thing is that companies will apply and say, oh yeah, we're going to do that later, or oh yeah, we're going to do this eventually. The assessment is not a, we're going to do this eventually. It is, we are already doing this and here's proof to show. So I think that's kind of the thing that gets a lot of companies tripped up. Laura, yes, if you go on B Lab's website, there's templates for supply chain code of conduct. There's an employee handbook template. I think it's under resources. I'll send it to you too. B Lab has a lot of things to help with. Okay, so we're almost done before we get to Q&A. So I just want to talk a little bit about how I work with companies. I know we're all in kind of different stages, but the most common way that I help companies go through this process is a 90-minute strategy session. We go through your assessment together, and I say, focus on this to get more points, do this, get this documentation. And then I have different policy templates and things that I've created, and I give you a choice of 5 of those templates for you to use. The average points that I've added in a session, I think it's 22. I had a client in December that came to me at 67 points. She applied at 101 points after our 90-minute session. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We can definitely talk through that. And then I'll put this in the chat too. And then again, I also do a full project management of the entire process. So if you're a bigger company or you just want someone to help you get certified, I call it the white glove treatment. I will, take you from, we're at 50 points and let's apply with 90. And that is like a 6-month, usually takes about 6 months. And then I do half day or day long sessions if you have a specific area you want to look at. However, I can be helpful to you in this. We could talk about it. Those are the kind of options that I give. So just to kind of wrap up, I guess our last question for you is, what is your biggest B Corp headache? What is something that you're like, oh my gosh, this seems so overwhelming. I don't have the time. I don't have the money, whatever it is. If you could drop that in the chat, that just helps us with programming and blogs so that we can answer those questions for you. Okay. So we talked about Laura's questions. Okay, a question: what happens if you don't apply and don't get the certification? When can you reapply? So within the verification process with B Lab, if it goes through and say you're at 75 points, you can go back and you just have to fill out the assessment again and add those things, and then you can immediately reapply. I think at that point, you then can just go, you sort of cut the queue a little bit and you're back in their process for them to get recertified. But yeah, they'll go through and then you just reapply when you're at 85 or whatever. Sophia says, how long does the documentation need to date back? 1 year. Yeah, I think as long as it's fairly current, for something like an employee handbook, a lot of these policies, I recommend that you at least before you submit it, and this should be the case for any policy. You should be reviewing it annually anyway. So if you're not, I recommend that you're doing that. And then usually companies that are applying will review the documentation, and then you just say, date reviewed this date. If for whatever reason you don't, I think, a year or 2 years. As long as, it's something that you're still using, I think that's fine. So I think we're just on questions. If you want to share your biggest B Corp headache, that would be helpful to us. Any other questions or anything I didn't cover, anything you want to get more into? I'm happy to answer that now. Or we also do these sessions every month. You can, I'm going to put Naman in my LinkedIn and other information in here. Laura says, can you talk a little bit more about forming a public benefit corporation? I am not a lawyer, so I cannot give really any other specifics other than what I've done. Laura, I can send you some resources and put you in touch with someone that has done that. I'll send those in the follow-up email. But yeah, just because I'm not a lawyer and because it's California, if you go to the B Lab website that I put in this legal requirements, this one, there is a state option. So if you go to California, it should give some information on that. And yeah, Laura, I'll send you the expert, the lawyer I know for that. What's the best way to show documentation of communication with suppliers? Are copies of emails sufficient? I think copies of emails, and even if you're writing it out and saying, we talked on this date or this is this. I will say for suppliers, to get the full kind of points benefit, it does help to have a supplier code of conduct and to show that you've sent that to suppliers. Again, a lot of, some companies have 3 suppliers. And then I think in that case, an email would be sufficient. If you're a big manufacturing company with a lot of suppliers and you're a product-based company, you will need to show more kind of robust information. But I think that, copies of emails are definitely sufficient to prove communication. Any other questions? I'll put my email in here too. If you think of anything, you can send me an email. You can connect with us on LinkedIn.